What is up, Bat Family? Welcome to another Batman breakdown video. So if you haven't seen it already, because notifications were disabled on my channel for the past day, I did a very in-depth breakdown, discussion, speculation, and theory video on the Batman teaser trailer. I will leave that in the cards above and on the end card of this video if you want to check out my reaction, essentially, and breakdown of all of the details that we learned. But in this video, guys, I would like to call this the definitive breakdown of everything we learned from Matt Reeves about the Batman. Now, obviously just isn't voiced in the trailer. Now, a lot of this, well, all of it even, was from the panel before the trailer was shown. A lot of you may already know this information, but some of you may have tuned in late. Also, DC Fandome is disappearing soon. You may find these videos online, but they may get taken down, so I thought I'd put it all in a place where I essentially list everything we know, where the character's at, how long he's been Batman for so far, things like how the public perceives Batman, how long did it take to make his suit, and everything like that. I just want to really have a fat nerd discussion video, and yeah, I would love for you guys to engage in this. So sit back, relax. Maybe you've heard this before, maybe you want to hear it again, maybe you just want to hear it again with some of my opinions and reactions to all of this. This video is for you, so I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, I would really appreciate a like and a share on this video. Diving into a lot of this stuff, it was very impressive finding out that this is just 25 to 30% of the movie in terms of what they've shot so far, and they already managed to put that kind of sizzle reel, if you will, that teaser trailer, of which I'm sure, and you can kind of go back to the Robert Pattinson intro to this whole DC Fandome the Batman panel, that I really hope it silenced the Robert Pattinson haters out there. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it really does sound quiet in the field of the Pattinson haters, and that is very much so a good, blissful silence. So in terms of getting into the real meat, what excites Matt Reeves, of course, the director of this movie, and what he relates to is that in the Batman story, the Batman isn't a superhero in the traditional sense. Now, this really does bring me back to what Pattinson said a few months ago that triggered fans. Some of you may or may not remember this, where he said, Batman isn't a superhero. So many people were like, Batman, what's he on about? Oh, Robert Pattinson doesn't know anything. Like, that was hilarious. And if you knew and had a bit of common sense, you kind of knew exactly what he was saying there. And Matt Reeves literally reiterates Pattinson here in terms of how his superpower, if he was to have one, is really the ability to endure. And not just the ability, but compulsion. He's driven by his past, of course, and, you know, there's things that he can't quite resolve. He's a very alive character, and I think that is all, you know, in terms of my opinion here, what drives us so much towards, you know, Batman as a character and why we love him so much. Now, it's very much so about the early days, about being Batman. He is so far from being perfect, and seeing him becoming what we all know about him and seeing it done in different ways, he feels like that was a way of doing something that hadn't been done necessarily in other movies. Now, Reeves goes on to say what is interesting is learning how to be Batman for Bruce Wayne in this movie and where he's at in his life. This is all an experiment for him. We're in year 2, and this Gotham experiment, this criminological experiment, is just really trying to figure out what he can do to finally change the city that he loves. I mean, this is all kind of self-explanatory in the sense that we all know Batman is kind of, you know, about this anyway, but I don't know about you guys, when we were watching this panel, hearing him say these things, it was like he was reading out scripture for Batman fans. It was like music to our ears, something that just, oh man, Matt Reeves, it's such a reassuring, not that I needed reassurance for the director of this film, but he knows, he gets this, the vision and everything, and just, you know, everything that I'm reading out now and I'm about to read out still, just, I can't take it anymore. So in the Batman, he's in that mode in terms of, you know, trying to figure out what to do to finally change the place. That's where you meet him, and you can see that he is charting what he's doing, and you see he's not having the effect that he wants to have, and that is when the murders start to happen. Now, the murders begin to describe the history of Gotham in a way only reinforces what he already knew about Gotham, but it opens up a world of much more corruption that went much farther. But as that story starts to come out without being an origin tale for him, it ends up being something that touches on his origins. So you start to see that it starts to describe this epic history of corruption in Gotham, that you start to understand, like, where did my family sit in all of that? And in that sense, Matt Reeves goes on to say it's just a way to take a story that is a detective story, a point of view story, a mystery, it's got action and all of that good stuff, but at the end of it, it's incredibly personal for him him, even though it is the story in which he's trying to understand and unravel this mystery. Now, very interestingly, well, of course, what I wanted to talk about, and I do go over this in my breakdown, without going into a very deep tangent and ramble about this theory here, in terms of when Matt Reeves gives away how does my family connect to all of that, right after talking about the corruption of Gotham and the history of corruption, I think it's safe to assume that Thomas and Martha Wayne, or at least maybe it's just one of them, perhaps Thomas, was very much so linked to what at least contributed to the beginnings of the corruption in Gotham. I mean, how devastating would it be for Bruce Wayne, the man who wants to combat injustice after experiencing such trauma from his past and such compulsion to do something about it? It actually started with the very Wayne name. So I this is what I mean. I feel like, Reeves gave quite a lot away, at least quite a lot of information for us Batman fans to work off with. But, there may be, well, of course there's going to be surprises, but hey, I really wouldn't be surprised if he realizes that the Waynes are indeed to blame. And that was a Joker reference for anyone who didn't get that. And when I say blame, by the way, just for somebody who might comment it, I'm not saying the Waynes are responsible for everything, but they are definitely not clean and the good guy. They definitely have a dirty past. Well, at least in my opinion. I absolutely love the part where Matt Reeves just bigged up the cast, essentially just saying Paul Dano plays a version of the Riddler that no one has ever seen before. What he's going to do will blow people's minds. Zoe Kravitz has an iteration of Selena Kyle that you've never seen of what she's doing, but it, also touches on all of these iconic kind of things from the comics. So it's always about trying to square off what you sort of know with also what's new. And that is really part of, I think, the exciting sort of process of making the Batman movie, which is to find a way of making it your own and yet still connect to all of these things where people go, that's my Selena. As usual, guys, I probably need to make a shirt of this at this point, but not everything is copy and paste. On top of not going super traditionalist, it will maintain aspects of that, but also add new innovative storytelling attributes and aspects to this film that I think is going to impress and, as Matt Reeves said, blow our mind in terms of these takes on the characters. Now, the Rogues Gallery, in a weird way, is the origins of a lot of our Rogues Gallery characters, he says. Now, Selena isn't Catwoman yet, he uses the example of, and that's actually a part of the journey. Oz is not yet the Kingpin he's going to become, and he's the Penguin, and in fact, he doesn't like being called the Penguin. And my theory there is that he will embrace that title, or they could actually just maintain the whole, ferocious Oswald in terms of anyone who says that, he will go very ham on and maybe kind of end them, but we'll have to wait and see. I think he might obviously embrace it just to go a bit more to the comic book style, but it will be interesting to start off as it being an absolutely hated word or nickname of his. Now, I'll go into this a lot more in my trailer breakdown, but I love how unrecognizable Colin Farrell is here as the Penguin. Man, it's just great. And Matt Reeves goes on to say that the Riddler, of course, is just emerging for the first time. Now, with all of this, the origins, if you're a fan of the Gotham show, say what you will about the Gotham show, but this is almost like Gotham the movie, but obviously a whole different take. Because what parallel I'm trying to draw here is that as Bruce was, becoming the Batman over a long period of time in that show, it was also about the villain's origins along the way. Like, it's quite a general consensus that Batman brings out the villains, and that is a thing, but also sometimes the villains are forged at the same time as Batman is being forged himself. And honestly, that's actually an approach I've always liked and often even preferred. Of course, you're always going to get villains, and in this trilogy, who come out as a direct result of Batman, but I like, in terms of the city and the corruption ever growing and Bruce trying to combat that, you also have the forging of other characters, just like the Riddler in this movie, and they're not at their pinnacle, and it might not even end up this way, but just to give you an example, a green suit with question marks on it, or a Riddler cane, we're getting a Riddler who's deciding to cover his face. Of course, Paul Dano does look like Edward Nashton, or Nigma, whatever way you want to say, even though he's Nashton in this movie. He may, by the very end of this movie, blend that name into Nigma, but my point is, he's just covering his face, and he's got the characteristics of the Riddler, but not quite yet the theatricality. And even though I just said that, of course he does. He's being very theatrical with his riddles. He's sending in freaking cars into funerals. Of course, but I'm just saying he's not presenting himself himself to Gotham in the cliche sense that some of you may be used to. But that will come, and the same can be said for Catwoman and her suit, and honestly, just about everything else in the movie. When he discusses Alfred, he says that Andy Serkis is one of the most beautiful actors, and he is playing an iteration of Alfred that I feel that people have never seen before, that I think is very exciting to share with people. And honestly, when he says that, I really don't know what to make of it, because I, just intuitively speaking here, and being a big fan and covering this very, very closely, I do feel like it has been done in some media. For example, well, we have got Pennyworth now. I don't think it's going to be that grounded of an Alfred, but you know, in Gotham, when Bruce was younger, this is obviously a younger Bruce. He's around 30 years old, 31, 32, depends if they're going to change Pattinson's age for the movie. It doesn't really matter. He's a younger Bruce, and we've got a younger Alfred. So I've already said this in my breakdown, but to kind of condense it, he's not the Michael Caine, frailer Alfred. He's going to be a younger one who's helping Bruce tinker with all of his toys, like the Batmobile, the grapple gun, the freaking batarangs, you name it. He's going to be, I think the relationship is going to be more of a brotherly relationship rather than the typical parental or carer of Bruce Wayne. Whilst that will all be present, of course, there may be some interesting things, of course, very exciting things that come out of a more younger, hands-on Alfred and also brotherly-esque relationship. And honestly, I really do have faith that is exactly what Reeves meant. I could be wrong, but watch this space. When Reeves talks about Jeffrey Wright, he says he is just one of the great actors to work with him as a totally new iteration of Gordon. And then it got cut off. I wonder what he said. Like, the stream kind of, they like condensed it for some reason. But as for Jeffrey Wright, I echo his sentiments there. If you've seen Westworld or any of his other work, he is phenomenal. He also goes on to talk about John Turturro's Carmine Falcone in this iteration. Yet again, you've never seen that one before, and how all of these characters, he thinks for him, is one of the challenges in terms of directing the movie, but exciting things about the creation of the story, which is that in going on this sort of desire to solve, or the urge and the compulsion to solve this series of crimes, you touch on all of these iterations of the beginnings of these characters. So the whole movie is like this snowball rolling. You just can feel the momentum building and building. And my only words on that is that Reeves is building very, very fleshed out and laid universe, possibly one of the best Batman universes we may have seen to date. And when discussing the Batsuit, he of course talked about how it's meant to be very practical because he had to be able to fight in it. And the Batsuit he made himself, something we all drew that conclusion ages ago, but he does mention how it's something evolving, so he will have multiple suits throughout the trilogy, I'm sure, and he is in year 2. That's something we've known. This is just reiterating facts that not facts, but stuff we basically already knew. He goes every night looking for trouble. You look at his cowl and you can see the gashes in it, and yeah, that's what I love about that camera test. You can see the experience and the kind of missions that he's already been out on, the scrapes, the scratches. It just adds the character to the armor itself. When it comes to talking about Gotham, and I loved his description here, he says, what we're trying to do is create a version of Gotham that you haven't seen before, and he wanted to present Gotham in a way that was really fleshed out, like an American city that you've never been to, through melding different locations, not just one, like Chicago or New York. The idea is to take something like Gotham Square, like Times Square, and he says, so if they actually shot it in Times Square, well, you'd be like, well, Gotham is like New York. But in this case, the Batman movie's case, is actually going to be in Liverpool, where all the sorts of foundations of Gothic architecture are, and then add all of the modern structures through CG, and then you kind of get, the freaking Gotham. But when you'll see the movie, you'll be like, hey, where is that city? Where did they shoot? He's really, truly forging a whole new vision, of which I feel like a Batman movie hasn't done in a very long time. Of course, each director gives their own take on it, but you know what I'm saying? I feel like this is an effort put in to make Gotham unique that will almost be unparalleled, and I can't wait to see the results. And we've already got a glimpse of that, obviously, throughout the teaser clips you're seeing on screen right now. Now, Christian Bale's advice, you probably heard this, was the typical, make sure you can pee in the suit. And as for that, I love when he started talking about when, the fan questions came in, how do the citizens of Gotham perceive the Batman at this point? And he goes on to say, well, because it's still early and because he's a vigilante, which obviously means he takes the law into his own hands, if you were in a city and there was a guy who dressed up as a bat and who showed up from the shadows and sometimes confronted those people and beat them up because he felt like what they were doing was wrong so that he could put the fear of God in them about the crimes they were committing, well, I think we would think, well, gee, that guy sounds a little bit dangerous. Bruce and, well, the Batman is not yet the vision of the character he becomes, where he becomes a symbol of hope for the city. As we all know ourselves, eventually that is where he ends up. He's early in that trajectory, so they're afraid of him, quite frankly. He's kind of a growing legend. There are some people wondering, does he exist? How exactly does he exist? That legend has been building day by day, and has been since he made his first appearance about a year and a half ago, as of course we're in year 2. So yeah, the public is afraid of him. That's one of the things I think that he will confront, he goes on to say, in the course of the story, in that Rob has to deal with him playing the character, which is the idea of how he's perceived. Now, as for the Batcave, obviously, as you can tell from the trailer, they built a completely original set for it, and they spent easily a year on the Batsuit and Batmobile, of which I think most people can agree looks absolutely glorious, especially now seeing it in motion. My God, I didn't expect the Batmobile to surge that energy out of the engine quite like that. I thought it'd be a bit more low-key due to the more muscle car approach, but wow, that did not remotely disappoint. And when being asked about the main difference of this Batman and the other Batmans from previous films, he essentially says it's not an origin tale. Despite meeting him in these early days, what's important about this iteration is the other stories are about mastering his fear and himself to become Batman, and in that Batman state, he's sort of in his best self. This is not doing that. It's not doing that origin, but it's kind of meeting him in the middle of this criminological experiment, to see him grow, to see him fail, feel very human, flawed. The idea of putting the audience in the shoes of that character, making the audience feel what he feels, I think that to me is what I hope is different about what we're doing. And the world's greatest detective and how he got there, I mean, that's been touched upon, but not as central to the plot as what they're doing with this movie. And honestly, guys, that is what probably excites me most about this movie. Obviously, the whole premise of it, the kind of foundations of all the characters coming into their own, we've already discussed that, but the detective mode, the more noir mode, the more kind of comic book accurate world's greatest detective. Oh man, I just really feel like Reeves is plucking everything out. I feel as far as saying it could be the quintessential Batman, but I guess that's my opinion. Directly off of that, he wanted to get into the mindset of the character, the psychology of the character, and he's conforming to the beast that is the Batman during the movie, and there's a lot that he's trying to do in the story. Bruce kind of confronting the shadow side of himself, but also, there's a degree to which you have self-knowledge, and, as a result of that, you usually are able to understand your own motivations. But the thing about, Batman is he's broken. So while he's doing all of these things for the reasons that he thinks is right and that have a heroic sort of grounding in them, there's also many things that are driven by parts of himself that he doesn't yet know. And he also draws very specific comparisons to the Darwin Cook ego connection. And this is yet another aspect that I really love about this movie, and how Bruce is discovering as much about himself in this movie as the mystery that is unfolding. I can't wait. And the fact that this is a trilogy, it's just going to be such an interesting journey to see Bruce evolve, let alone in this movie, but throughout all of them. But that is absolutely everything he went over in terms of specifically the Batman movie. He did talk about how the Gotham PD series and the two projects and, how they overlap and connect, but I want to do a separate video on that. I want to go on Facecam and just kind of get into what I feel that, series is going to be about, and, especially dissect what Matt Reeves said. With this video, as I said at the beginning, I just wanted to get everything up to date in one video, something you can watch back with a bit of my opinion and speculation, and just have a place for it to be. I think all of this goes to show the absolute care, attention, respect to the character, true to the character. Everything is just being handled the way I feel like. As a result, I just struggle to understand what massive issues some people would have. But hey, each to their own. I would love to hear all of your thoughts about what Matt Reeves said in the panel and what you think about what I said in this video. Is there anything you slightly disagree with or wish they at least would explore in the movie or in future movies? But other than that, of course, let me know those comments down, in the comment section below. Like this video if you did enjoy it. Make sure you subscribe as well for all kinds of videos, theory videos coming up on the Batman, and make sure you do check out my Batman trailer breakdown if you haven't done so already. It is like a 20-something minute video, but I do go into a lot of detail detail. I go into a lot of theories. There's one in particular that I really have a lot of faith about, and it has to do with the Batcave and how he enters the Batcave. But hey, I could be completely wrong about that, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But hey, I really do appreciate all the support on the channel. Bear with me whilst I roll out the videos for DC Fandome. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you, Bat Family, in the next video. Goodbye.